Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello and welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Thursday, March 6th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 503 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. Another day closer to the start of NFL free agency. The official new league year starts March 12th, but legal tampering will begin on March 10th. So that is like the unofficial day one of free agency. So just a couple days away. And we've got some free agent topics to discuss today on the podcast. As we get closer, I want to break down some of the latest Jets quarterback targets, some guys that are reportedly arising as front runners. And we'll also take a look at one player that, if he becomes available through free agency, that the New York Jets could target up front to beef up the defensive line. We will get to that as well a little bit later on. As always, though, before we begin, we've got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. If you want to get in on any of the sports betting action, check out BetUS and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. It is March. March Madness is right around the corner. If you want to get in on that or any other sports betting action, check out America's favorite over at BetUS. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek. If you want to lock in the best seats for March Madness or any of the best seats for anything in entertainment, plays, concerts, shows, you name it, SeatGeek has it. If you can buy a ticket for an event, SeatGeek has it there for you. Use promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events. And of course, our friends over at Huga House. If you want any of their new arrival sweatshirts or hats along with their originals, check them out. And at checkout, use code BUBS for 15% off any purchase. When you use that code on your first purchase, you'll get 30% off your second purchase as well. So check them out and get yourself some Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 503. Another day, another pod, more New York Jets news to discuss as we draw closer to free agency. Of course, thank you all again for tuning in here on a Thursday program. So Connor Hughes the other day, I wanted to start with just some quarterback talk here before we get into a potential option for the New York Jets to target if he becomes available in free agency, if a trade is not done on the defensive line. We'll get to that here soon, but I wanted to start with the quarterbacks. The other day, Connor Hughes released an article. Zach Rosenblatt of The Athletic as well has spoke a lot about the quarterbacks. Of course, a lot of insiders have had a lot of takes, all very similar in the area of really 3 names that it feels like are kind of the front runners now for the New York Jets at the quarterback position. And it feels like the New York Jets process at the quarterback in free agency is becoming a lot more clear. So I'll throw this up here on the screen for the YouTube audience. This is from Connor Hughes of SNY a couple days ago in an article he wrote coming out of the Combine. And he said the Jets are far more likely to dabble in the second-tier veteran quarterback market, sources who met with the team in Indianapolis told SNY. They came away from those meetings believing that the Jets' plan is to pair Tyrod Taylor with another veteran and then draft someone on day 2 or trade up late in the first round to have the 5th-year option. Marcus Mariota, Justin Fields, and Carson Wentz are three names to keep an eye on per sources. The first part of this should not come as much of a surprise. I know there's been some steam in recent, like over the last week, especially with Cam Ward's comments at the combine that maybe the Jets would trade up for Cam Ward. And maybe that still happens. I don't see it happening. I would not do that. The first part there shouldn't come by much of a surprise, and that is the fact that the Jets have Tyrod Taylor on the roster. You most likely add another veteran, and then you draft a Jackson Dart, a Kyle McCord, a Will Howard, somebody of that nature, somebody like that on day 2, maybe day 3, middle rounds, potentially trade back into the first. We've talked about this a little bit on this podcast where Jackson Dart, if they like him enough, do you trade back into the first so then you can have that extra year where he can have that 5th-year option and you can sit and have him learn and try and develop him that way and potentially you find your answer? That's always kind of seemed like the realistic path. The biggest takeaway there is it feels like we've kind of got the 3 names to look out for when Monday comes around. That is Justin Fields, that is Marcus Mariota, and that is also Carson Wentz. We'll start with Justin Fields. He's my favorite of the 3, and really out of the realistic quarterback options for the Jets in free agency, Justin Fields would be my favorite to pick up, and I think most Jet fans are probably on board. The biggest question with Justin Fields, because I do think Justin Fields is actually becoming more and more realistic for the Jets than I think many other Jet fans originally thought. I think when we first got the news of Aaron Rodgers and you first entered the offseason, early February, and you tried to think of some names for the New York Jets at quarterback, even after the season ended, going all the way back to January, you kind of thought, Fields would be an interesting name and somebody to look for. But the biggest thing with Fields was it felt like they might get outbid for him. His price might be a little too high. There would maybe be other teams. But you kind of get the feeling, you've heard some reports that it feels like maybe he'd have some interest in the Jets. He'd be open to coming to the Jets. And you also still don't quite know what's going to happen in Pittsburgh. Now, I do feel like he probably will end up back in Pittsburgh, but it feels like a month ago, him going to Pittsburgh was like a lock. It almost feels like recently that's becoming not as much of a lock, and it feels like it's between the Jets and the Steelers now for Justin Fields, which I feel like, just in my opinion, is maybe a little bit more likely than what we originally thought with Justin Fields based on these reports. Now, this is all reporting. This is not Justin Fields saying, I'm going to the Jets. No, this is all just reporting. This is all just sources. This is all just kind of a feel of what these organizations, what the Jets want right now as we currently sit March 6th, just a couple days away. But Fields is my top guy for the Jets to go out and pick up a guy that's realistic, right? You team him back up with Garrett Wilson. They were college teammates. And I mentioned this a ton. I want a guy that can run. I want a guy that can move. I know his arm, his passing ability, there's some question marks. You've seen flashes. You've also seen a lot of ugly. But I think you look at Fields and you look at the way this offense would probably be structured, you'd be looking at a offense led by Tanner Engstrand that would look very similar to what Baltimore runs, where it'd be a lot of RPOs, be a lot of Fields running, a lot of Breece Hall, a lot of Braylon Allen, a lot of the offensive line, downhill blocking, and being able to win in the trenches and go about your offense that way. And then Fields kind of manages the game through the air, which I think could get the Jets to a competitive state. I also think you have a high ceiling with Fields. He's never lived quite up to potential. I'm not saying he's going to come in here and he's going to be the answer, but you never know. Maybe he comes here, gets into this system, and you find something in him and you unlock something in him. And who knows, maybe you stumble upon him and he can be a guy that can lead this team moving forward. I doubt that would be the case, but you never know. He's still only 26 years old. He just turned 26 actually yesterday. He's only, he's entering year 5, which is kind of later for a quarterback, but a guy that's shown you some positives, a guy that is, you can at least understand what the Jets offense would look like. And I think you can at least buy into it, right? 4-2 last year with the Steelers, 66.3% of his passes completed, 1,106 yards, 6.9 yards per completion, 5 touchdowns a pick, and a 93.9 passer rating. Again, I think he will return to Pittsburgh, but it does feel like here a little bit more steam leaning towards the Jets recently, and it feels like this is a lot more likely, especially from the Jets side of things, a lot more likely of going out and trying to pry Fields here as opposed to maybe what we originally thought a couple weeks ago earlier in the offseason. So that's the Fields stuff. The other two names on this list are, I don't like it all. I don't like it all. I'll be honest. We've had episodes on quarterbacks, right? We've talked a lot about different names. Wentz and Mariota would be probably near the bottom of my list if I had to rank every quarterback out there, every quarterback that was available. There is other names out there that I would prefer over these two guys. I would take a Winston over both of these guys. I would even probably take Kirk Cousins over both of these guys. I have very little interest in Mariota and Wentz, especially Wentz, just because I think the ship has sailed. His opportunity coming out of Philly to try and prove that he could still start, of course, dealt with injuries there. It was an ugly ending to what was a good, or, he had a great 2017 season, gets hurt, comes back, still dealt with injuries. 2018, 2020, of course, was ugly. The breakup was ugly. He goes to Indy in 2021. It was started good and then flopped at the end. And now he's just been a backup. He's kind of like, his day, to me, the whole Wentz thing has completely passed. He's now 32 years old. This is a guy that's been on 4 different teams in the last 4 years. Indy in 2021, Washington 2022, Rams in 2023, the Chiefs last year. I mean, there's nothing exciting about Wentz. There's nothing. I talk about this, right? At least Tyrod can move around. He'll take chances deep. He's also a guy that has a track record of being able to step in as a stopgap and win you games. Wentz doesn't really have that. He flopped in his 1 year with the Colts and has been just a backup since. There's also not anything about his game that really excites you, right? I talk about Fields, mobility. He's also still younger. There's still some untapped potential potentially that the Jets can tap into. Winston. Yeah, he's going to throw a ton of picks, but you know what? He's going to take chances. He's going to score touchdowns. You at least have that. Wentz does not give you any of that. Wentz is just boring. He's kind of old. Like, he's worn out. The whole Wentz thing to me is over with. It's done with. I want nothing to do with him personally. Nothing against the guy. I just think I think you could go with even a Kirk Cousins. I understand there's not a whole lot exciting about Kirk Cousins, but he would be extremely cheap. And at least this is a guy that, at least has in the last 3 years has a body of work that you can at least look at and say, you know what? That's all right. We haven't seen Wentz go out there and put together a good, we saw him the 1 year in Indy coming as didn't work. In the last 3 years, it hasn't worked either. So I think the ship has kind of sailed on Wentz, just in the NFL in general, from a starting perspective. And as for Mariota, I'm also not a big fan. The one thing I will say with Mariota is if you want to talk about a guy that can maybe move a little bit, he potentially could be that. But similar to Wentz, was in Vegas 2 years. He's bounced around a ton here recently. Vegas 2 years, then Atlanta in 2023, then Philly Atlanta 2022, Philly in 2023, Washington 2024. The last time Mariota started was in 2022 with the Falcons, where he completed 61.3% of his passes for 2,219 yards, 15 touchdowns, 9 picks, and an 88.2 passer rating and 7.4 yards per completion. Again, I would take, Mariota, I maybe would be slightly more interested in Wentz. I just think Wentz is just flat out horrific. At least Mariota can move a little bit. He also has, actual starting experience, a little bit more recent than Wentz. I know it's only 1 year, but You're talking about Wentz that's kind of just been flat out a backup, hasn't started other than the last game last year, but hasn't started a season in 3 years. Mariota, 2022 with Atlanta. But don't love Mariota either. I don't. 4 different teams in the last 5 years, entering his 11th season, also on the older side. So don't love the whole Mariota thing either. I would take Fields, Kirk, Winston over all 3 of these guys. Of course, take Tyrod as well. And then I think you take your chance on your middle of the round quarterback, personally, over Mariota and Wentz. But that's just my opinion. So those are the quarterbacks. Again, it's kind of uninspiring. I mean, it's really Fields and then questions. Because if you can't get Fields, do you take a cheap Kirk flyer? How high or low are they on Winston? Or do they go with the boring Wentz route? Or do they go with the Mariota route? It'll be interesting. Only time will tell. Those are the quarterbacks. I want to move on now to the defensive side of the football because we have talked a lot of offense here. Of course, receiver, quarterback, those probably being, 2 of the 3 biggest questions. The other biggest question, you could throw safety in the mix as well in terms of biggest hole on this roster, is defensive line, specifically interior defensive line next to Quinnen Williams. Now, the Jets can address this in a variety of different ways. They can either do that in free agency. They can do it in free agency and the draft. Do they find a trade? Whatever. I think mostly you're going to see a guy picked up in free agency, draft an interior defensive lineman, whether or not that defensive lineman is, let's say, a Mason Graham in the first round, Kenneth Grant, somebody like that, or you wait for a middle round guy. I think you draft one, sign one, and a name that's could become available. The Commanders announced they will be searching for a trade for Jonathan Allen. If they can't get a trade, they're letting Jonathan Allen seek a trade. If a trade does not happen, they will release him. He'll hit the open market, and of course, he'll have a chance to sign wherever he'd want. Jonathan Allen's a guy that I would bring on board immediately if I'm the New York Jets. Now, I will say this. We just got done talking about quarterbacks and how realistic they all are. I don't necessarily see Jonathan Allen that realistic. I see Allen as probably a guy that he's been with the Commanders for 9 seasons, entering his 9th season, has been with the Commanders for 8 seasons. I think Allen's probably a guy that would prefer to go to a team that can probably win now and has a chance to win a Super Bowl now, where he is 30 years old. He's getting up there in age, as opposed to a team with the Jets, who, of course, is retooling, new regime, not built to win right now. But I could be wrong. That is just how some of these guys roll. But we'll see how that all plays out. But Jonathan Allen is on the top of my radar if he does become available in free agency. This is a guy with a very good track record, 2-time Pro Bowler in 2021 and 2022, and still has a lot of gas left. He did tear his pec last season, so he did only play 8 games. I don't think that should be much of a concern, though. I know torn pec, injury, 30 years old. I get all that. But you look at his track record, he's not a guy that's very injury prone. This isn't like a guy that's dealt with injuries in the past. You look at his last couple seasons, 8 games last year, but then prior to that, 16, 16, 17, 16, 15, 16, and only 5 his rookie year. But this has been a guy that's been healthy. He plays. So I don't think the injury last year is much of a concern. You do look at what he did in 8 games last year. He had 19 tackles, 3 sacks, 7 QB hits, 3 tackles for loss. He finished the year with a 54.6 overall PFF grade, 63 pass rush grade, and a run defense grade that was 41.3. Now, his last season, and again, I want to add some context to some of these numbers here in a second. His last season healthy, 2023, where he played 16 games, 5.5 sacks, 53 total tackles, 19 QB hits, 10 tackles for loss. Allen, the last couple years, now very good pass rusher. Throughout his career, his strength has always been his pass rushing ability, especially when you look at some of his seasons in like 2021 and 2022, his 2 Pro Bowl seasons. 9 sacks in 21, 7.5 sacks in 22, 10 tackles for loss in 21, 16 tackles for loss in 22. And then he also had 30 quarterback hits in 2021, which was by far a career high. And then 17 QB hits in 2022. In 2023, he had 19 QB hits, which was actually the second most he's ever had in his career. It's a guy in his career that has 118 QB hits, 60 tackles for loss, 401 total tackles, and 42 sacks. He's a guy that's going to average about 6 to 8, kind of in that 7 range of sacks each season. And he's typically a lot better against the run than he's been. The last 2 seasons, he has struggled against the run a little bit, especially 2023 was really poor. Last year was not great again. Part of that, again, only 8 games, torn pec. But you look at a couple years ago, 21, the run defense was never that bad. His strength has always been pass rushing. The run defense has taken a little bit of hit, but I still think healthy next to Quinnen Williams can kind of jump back up to what he's been, where he was at from a run defensive perspective. But in terms of a pass rush perspective, you're getting a guy that has been a productive pass rusher his entire career, is a veteran, and I think this is also very important. This is a guy that is just saw the Washington Commanders. He lived through all the issues with that team dating back to 2017 when he was a 17th overall pick by them. He has seen that team through, the train wreck that they were up until last season where he saw the turnaround. We've talked about this a lot, but it is important. You want talent, but it's also important that the Jets find some of these culture guys. Jonathan Allen can be that guy. He just saw the turnaround in Washington, a 1-year turnaround. He comes into this locker room, not only what he provides on the field, but I think his locker room presence, I think, could be huge as well for this team if it's a move that could happen or a move that does happen. I'd totally be on board with it. And we'll see what happens. Again, seeking a trade. If not, we'll release him. So only time will tell. But Jonathan Allen and Quinnen Williams in that interior, and then you throw a rookie in there, you completely revamp the defensive line just by doing that in a very, very big way. A guy that can rush the passer, get to the quarterback, take some of the pressure off of Quinnen, and then also be steady in the run game. In what I think is, again, next to Quinnen, I think he can get back to where he was about 2 years ago from a run defensive perspective after kind of 2 years struggling a bit. Jonathan Allen, I think, should be at top of a lot of Jets fans' lists if it's something that really becomes available, free agent-wise, gets released. So let me know what you think on that. Let me know what you think as well on the quarterbacks. Who do you want under center for the New York Jets? Who do you think will be under center for the New York Jets in week 1? What do you think they do in free agency? Jonathan Allen, would you want him? Realistic, unrealistic? Thoughts on that? Figured I'd throw some defensive line talk into here as well. We've talked a ton about the receivers. We talked a ton about quarterbacks. We talked a ton about safeties. Figured let's switch it up, throw some of the defensive line in here and get rolling. A couple days away, we'll have a lot more content coming up. I'll have a full free agency preview and prediction video. We'll be breaking down, all the guys, what the Jets, all these names from each position of need that the Jets could potentially bring in free agency. We'll also take a look at the Jets' incoming free agents right now, and if I believe they're going to stay or leave. So we'll have that up here on a video very soon. Look for that either tomorrow or over the weekend before Monday, the kind of unofficial, technically the start, legal tampering, unofficial start of free agency before the official new league year on Wednesday the 12th. So we'll have that video up previewing it all. And then, of course, we'll be here throughout next week recapping or breaking down, reacting to all the moves. So things are officially ramping up. Free agency is here, the first big step in the NFL offseason. So thank you so much for tuning in. We'll catch you next time. As always, JETS, 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 Jets.